This interview is part of the History Heard project. The content of this interview may be used for historical research. However, no part of the video itself may be reproduced without the express written permission of an authorized representative of History Heard or Joel Engel. Today is July 1st, 2009 at 3 p.m. This is an interview with Joel Engel in Armonk, New York. He was born on February 4th, 1936 in New York City, New York. You led a team at Bell Labs that created cell phone technology. So what does it feel like to have been a part of such a huge, something that revolutionized communication?
Well, at the time, we didn't realize it would revolutionize communications. For a couple of reasons, which I'll describe to you in a minute, we saw it mostly as a business service. Real estate agents, delivery trucks, people who repaired TVs and things like that. There was an industry organization called the Electronics Industry Association, and they had done a study, and they concluded that a fleet of trucks with 4 vehicles equipped with mobile telephones could do the same work as 5 trucks if they didn't have the mobile telephones. Just for the efficiency of going from place to place and calling back for parts and all of that stuff. And so that's what we saw mainly as the economic reason why anybody would take the service. Mm-hmm. Now, we knew that eventually it would become a consumer service because virtually every technology that gets introduced, not every single one, but almost every single one, starts off in the workplace. Mm. If you think about personal computers, if you think about Xerox machines, copiers, if you think about fax machines, even central air conditioning. Yeah. I can remember the first job that I had, the building was not air conditioned. And then we moved to a new building that was air conditioned, and it was a pleasure. And I would come home at night to an unair conditioned house. And as a matter of fact, my wife used to tease me. She used to say, "Oh, I know it's harder for you because you're not used to it, But what it convinced me of was the next house if I built a house or if I bought a house that could do it, I was going to have central air conditioning in the home. And now I've got a fax machine and a copier and a computer, and so our experience has been that people. The other thing is, particularly with electronics, the cost of the product is very much dependent on how many you make. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's called learning curve pricing. Right. Okay, because there's such a big investment in the manufacturing facility to make the thing. In the case of cellular telephone, for example, before you can sell service to a single customer, you have to put up the towers all over the city. Okay, so now you've spent millions of dollars to serve one person. Yeah. Okay, and it may take years and years before it gets to the point where it flattens out and the cost per customer becomes relatively stable. So you have to start at the beginning with customers who are willing to pay more money because it's worth more to them. They save money by taking the service. And then as the service builds up and more people buy it and the price starts to come down, that's when you can start getting consumers involved. Yeah. The other thing that we didn't realize, and you folks are of an age where you're probably not even going to relate to what I'm about to say, but the U.S. society has become much, much more a consumer society than it was back in the 70s when we worked on this. It was inconceivable at that time that parents would be willing to spend somewhere between $30 and $70 a month for a teenager to walk around and be able to send text messages. Yeah. It was just the society was such that that wouldn't happen at that time. And so the society has changed to the point where a lot of things that were considered real luxuries at that time, people now think of as necessities. You have to have a plasma screen TV and high definition. So, as I said, back then, we really didn't conceive of how widespread it was going to be. The other thing that made it widespread that has nothing to do with the technology is spectrum, radio spectrum was very, very scarce. There were different industries that were fighting for the spectrum. When we made the proposal to the FCC for cellular telephone, it was to take away part of the UHF television spectrum. And the television people fought us tooth and nail because they didn't want to give it up. Even though they weren't using it at the moment, they didn't want to give it up. Well, what happened was after the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union collapsed, the military gave up a lot of spectrum that they were preserving. And they were going to satellite communications anyway. And so that opened up a lot of spectrum, and that also helped it. I don't think, given the spectrum that existed back in the 70s, that you could even if the people were willing to pay for it, that you could support as many people as you have now.
Yeah. Okay. So what motivation did you have to take on this project?
Well, when what happened was I joined Bell Laboratories right out of graduate school, and I went for my PhD part-time while I was at Bell Laboratories. Bell Labs was a very terrific place to work back in those days. They gave us up to 1 day a week off to go to school, to graduate school. And then when I accumulated all of my coursework and passed all my qualifying exams, they gave me a year off at full pay to stay on campus and write a thesis. And that was the kind of thing that they did. Well, when I finished my thesis, it was right at the time when we were working on the Apollo program to put a man on the moon. And the government had asked AT&T, the Bell system, because the Bell system was the only institution that had ever done anything that big. So they asked the AT&T to form a company down in Washington to advise them, and I was asked to join them, which I did for a couple of years. And then when I came back to Bell Laboratories, I ended up in a group that was working on mobile telephone. And mobile telephone at that time was very, very primitive. For example, in Manhattan, you could have 3 simultaneous calls. The 4th call would get blocked. The little red light would come on and say all the channels are busy. And it was very, very primitive and very small coverage area. And I'm not the inventor of cellular telephone. There was, for years and years, it was kicking around this idea to have a system of cells where you could repeat frequencies, and so you could have 10 conversations for every one, because you would have 10 different cells far enough apart that they wouldn't interfere using the same channels. And that idea had been kicking around for at least 20, 30 years. But nobody really thought that you could make something like that work.
Yeah.
Okay, I did. Okay, and there were 3 of us. A fellow named Dick Frankiel and another one named Phil Porter. And we were actually in different organizations in Bell Laboratories. But we used to get together and, on the blackboard lay out a system and how it would work. And I started writing papers that got published in the journals about it. But it was really like a hobby,